Howdy!
Howdy!
Hello, how are y'all doing today?
Good.
Well, welcome to, I believe this is our fifth Eat Well, Be Well nutrition series. So one more after this. It feels like it went by a little bit too fast, but hopefully you guys have been able to tune in to some of our previous sessions and learn a few things about nutrition and how we can stay well with it. But today's session is the Everyday Athlete to Weekend Warrior, and I think this is the one that I've gotten the most feedback on about excitement. Like even my husband was like, wait, you're doing what? Can I tune in? And they can. So I don't know if you guys know this or not, but we have been uploading each of these live streams and recordings to our Human Resources YouTube channel, so you guys can watch these. Those links are actually on our website, so just keep that in mind, and if you want to share this with maybe your family members, please feel free to do so. Totally available to do that. And Megan has been incredibly awesome at sending us the presentations that she provides. So we put those slides out to you guys every week, so hopefully you've been getting those emails. And if you haven't, then just let me know and I can send them out to you, okay? All right. Other than that, I'm going to send it over to Megan, and we'll get started. Thank you all for being here today.
Great, thank you.
Well, howdy.
Howdy.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Megan Wyndham. I'm a registered and licensed dietitian, and I work on campus in the Butyl Health Center. So I see students every day, and in fact, yesterday I just saw a patient who was working on being on the triathlon team. So I see a lot of not our professional or our student athletes per se. I've seen some of them, but more of the weekend warriors, some of our just everyday athletes, and that's what I want to help communicate those messages for you all today. So whether you exercise daily and have competed in multiple events, or if you just recreationally love to be active, hopefully this presentation will help. Please stop me at any point and ask questions. So if you have a personal question or something that you're wanting to know, or something that's on here that's a little maybe confusing, or you're wanting to ask further questions about, just raise your hand, stop me mid-presentation. It's completely fine. So let's start out a little bit about fueling before, during, and after exercise. This is one topic I get a lot of questions about, and really even for my students that I work with, or just traditional athletes that I've worked with in the past. When we try to take our nutrition to the next level, we've really got to focus on when we're eating before, during, and after. So some of the presentations I've already done, if you've tuned in or been a part of, we've talked about just general nutrition. So how to eat healthy, how to be healthy in general. This is going to get a little bit more specific to focus on before, during, and after to really enhance that exercise regimen. So pre-workout, what we're really looking at is, I always say go with your gut pre-workout, literally. So what feels comfortable to you? Really where we want to emphasize is more the post-workout. You're going to see more of that specific guidance on that. But pre-workout, if you've never really eaten much before an exercise, don't go and eat a whole huge plate of food and hope that you're going to do better, because it probably won't sit very well with your stomach. When we look at this here, our longer-term exercise, so more endurance athletes, we're going to want a mix of fluids, carbohydrates, electrolytes to help sustain that activity. Too little fluid or too little carbohydrate can really compromise our performance. And so when I was explaining this to my patient yesterday, I said you have to think about our muscles store glycogen, which is a form of glucose. And so those muscles need glucose to perform, especially our long endurance athletes or those who are doing more of an hour-long activity or longer. So we need that to perform. So if we don't have carbohydrates on board, or if we're on a low-carb diet, our performance is going to be compromised here. Dehydration can also impair performance, which is tiredness and fatigue. And that doesn't mean guzzle a whole lot of water before you go exercise, especially our runners. It kind of sloshes in the stomach and it doesn't feel well. But that means staying hydrated the day before, the week before, constantly throughout. So go with your gut and what feels comfortable here. What I like to emphasize is 3 to 4 hours before an exercise, one, we need carbohydrates. Secondly, we need some protein to help prevent some of that muscle soreness and enhance that muscle from fatiguing. And here are several meal ideas that you can see, and certainly I'll share these slides at the end so you don't have to write everything down. But you're going to see carb and protein combinations. Now this is 3 to 4 hours before a meal, so here, or before an exercise. So when we're looking at this, it's really important to remember this isn't immediately before an exercise. We're going to talk about that here in a second. But this would be maybe a snack before we go exercise in the afternoon. This may be if we're exercising early morning. We're going to look more at this next slide because for those of you who are like me, I don't want to get up at 2 in the morning to eat something to go work out at 5. So directly before exercise, this is what we're looking at here. We want to hydrate and we want more of our quick energy sources. So the way I like to explain this is if we think about our body on a typical day, and you and I right now, blood is flowing throughout to our muscles, to our heart, to our stomach. It's digesting different things. A lot of times it's going to our stomach more regularly than we would think. But when we go exercise, the blood flow is going to our arms, our legs, our muscles to move. So whenever we put something in, whether it's a half of a banana or a peanut butter sandwich, that sits in our stomach. And so if it only has 30 minutes to digest, something like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is going to sit there in our stomach. The blood is now flowing to our arms and legs, not to our stomach anymore because we're exercising. And that's where we can get a lot of just cramping, a little bit of feeling sick, not performing as well. So that's why you're going to see very simple carbohydrates about 30 minutes to an hour before exercise. So simple carbohydrates here, fruit with very little fiber. So that may be an applesauce instead of a full apple. That may be half of a banana. That may be a mango. Very simple type carbohydrates that are going to have a little fiber, but you don't want to go extensive with large amounts of fiber. Fiber and fat take longer to digest, so it's going to sit there and not break down in enough time. We really want to steer away from protein at this time too, right before exercise, because that takes longer to digest. That would be something we would want to do the 3 to 4 hours beforehand. Sports beans, gummies, this is when we get into a little bit of talking about during exercise, and I'll talk about that shortly, but these are gels, goos, for any of you who have done any type of long endurance running or triathlon type activity. That's more of our simple carbohydrate. For those of you who are like, I don't really even know what you're talking about there, jelly beans, raisins, candies, those would be certainly appropriate. We're talking simple carbohydrates because we need that, okay? During exercise, the recommendation here, and it may be on a future slide here, but I'm going to share it anyway. During exercise, if we've exercised for an hour or longer, that's when we start to deplete the glycogen stores in our muscles. And remember, glycogen is carbohydrate, is glucose. We start to deteriorate that and our body needs some. So if we're running a marathon and at an hour point, we need to start thinking about what am I going to eat here? And this would be something very simple carbohydrate, gels, goos, gummy bears, raisins, Skittles, something very simple. Or if you're just not one that likes to eat much, it would be something like Gatorade or even diluted Gatorade to help with hydration. So we're thinking very simple carbohydrates right before and even during that exercise. So questions about pre-exercise here, 3 to 4 hours before, any questions about evening time? Yes.
So for the sports bar directly before, do you want to then have sports bars that don't have too much protein?
Yes, so the question was, what about sports bars that are listed on here directly before? Yes, we would want to go with something pretty simple, carbohydrate. We're not looking at a huge, heavy Cliff Bar. If it is a Cliff Bar that you love, maybe it's a small portion of that. It's not the whole thing. So very simple carbohydrates. Simple doesn't mean unhealthy. It just means that our body doesn't need to break down a lot of that fiber beforehand. Okay? Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What about pre-workout drinks like Cellacor and
Yeah,
that kind of thing?
Yeah, pre-workout. We'll talk a little bit about supplements here at the end of the presentation, but for pre-workout drinks, shakes, supplements, that type of thing, a lot of our pre-workout, here again, I always say go with your gut. So go with what feels comfortable and try it during a practice event. Try it during times that you're just training, not the day of the event. When you're doing your pre-workout, a lot of our pre-workout shakes and supplements are mainly caffeine-based to give us that stimulant and boost of energy. If you think about when I did a lot of work with the Houston Texans and even some Rice athletes, they can't take a lot of these things because it's illegal and it tests negative when they're testing for it. So a lot of them will just drink a little bit of coffee or a little bit of soda or a little bit of caffeinated tea for that caffeine boost. I don't work for this company, but it has been proven effective, and it's called Beet Elite. It's beetroot juice. I like it because there's no addictive behaviors or components in it. It helps with opening blood vessels. It's nitric oxide really, and it's just beet extract. So it's more in a natural form. I recommend it for some of my students wanting to enhance performance but don't want to take a lot of the supplements or shakes. It's called Beet Elite, but it's beetroot extract that you can drink. Yes?
The pre-workout snack and then directly before snack, is that an either or thing that you're presenting?
You could. So the question was pre-workout, should we do the 3 to 4 hours before and right immediately before? Here again, go with what feels comfortable. What I would suggest is if you're doing the type of activity maybe first thing in the morning, it would be the short acting carbohydrate. If it's more of I'm doing my exercise at 5 p.m., I had lunch, but now it's still a little bit, it's 5 hours in between that, we may need more of that 3 to 4 hour snack before. But great question. Okay, let's talk a little bit about after exercise. So post-exercise, to me, when I talk with patients or clients, this is the most important thing to think about the recovery, because how we recover impacts the next day's training, impacts the next week's activity. And I find that with a lot of patients, they do better and they perform a whole lot better when they're able to recover faster. So 15 to 30 minutes after exercise. So we ran from 4 to 5 p.m. From between 5 and 5:30, this is what we need to be thinking about. So one, we've got to replace our fluids and electrolytes. Secondly, our muscles used carbohydrates, so we need that. And third, we want to repair the muscles that were torn or a little bit broken with our protein. So we need a combination of all of these. So what does that look like? We want to consume 20 grams of protein and carbohydrate within the 30-minute post-exercise window. This really helps with muscle building. So that's 20 grams of protein. This could be in a protein shake. You've heard of chocolate milk being a great post-recovery drink or workout. I like to recommend it a lot. One, it's economical. Two, it has a source of protein and carbohydrate. Your regular cow's milk will have carbohydrate and protein, but the chocolate milk has a little bit more carbohydrate. And for my endurance athletes or those who are doing more cardio, we want that carbohydrate and protein balance. Yes?
Are you saying 20 grams of protein and 20 grams of carbohydrate?
No. Usually, I mean, you can do 1-to-1 if you really want. I usually say it depends on what type of activity we're doing. So if we're doing more strength training, muscle building, I would do maybe 20 grams of carb to about 20 grams of protein to 10 grams of carb. If we're doing just more of our running, athletic, cardio-based activity, it can be 1-to-1. Carbohydrates, I would emphasize a little bit heavier for our endurance athletics or activity, just because you're using more of that glycogen store than just building the muscle. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
You have to wait at least 15 minutes after the exercise before you start eating?
No, you do not have to. You can do it right away. Some people just struggle with, my stomach feels sick, I don't really want to put anything in. And that's why liquids are a little bit easier to tolerate. So the post-workout protein shake or chocolate milk with something would be appropriate here. Yes. Yes.
What if you're a little later than 30 minutes? Does it have a big impact?
You know, the latest research is really showing, I say 30 to 60 minutes, but when we can get it in the 30-minute window, the analogy I'll use is our muscles are like a dry sponge after we exercise. So whatever we put in is really being absorbed for nutrients, but also muscle repair and growth. When we get out of that window, it's not that it's not beneficial, it just doesn't absorb and repair as efficiently as we could. So the closer we can get to the post-workout time period, the better it's going to be. Yes, ma'am.
And just to give me a flavor, how much is 20 grams? I mean, are we looking at an 8-ounce cup or?
So an 8-ounce glass of milk is about 8 to 10 grams of protein of cow's milk. So we're looking at a little bit more than that. If you struggle with, oh, that's a lot of volume, we could add a scoop of protein powder. Usually 1 scoop of protein powder is about 20 to 30 grams of protein, depending on what we're using there. But we could certainly add other things to that too. We could add, if you like, to add a scoop of peanut butter or nuts or things like that. If you're more of the natural food than the supplements, that would be appropriate as well. Yes?
And is this sort of 20 grams of protein and carbs, is that kind of for a baseline average of like working out intensive for like an hour? Because I'm guessing obviously like a marathon you're going to need a lot more, but if you've done like 45-minute less intense, you're not going to need that much.
Absolutely. So I would, the question was kind of how do we gauge how much protein? Is this for an hour of exercise, 2 hours of exercise? Really, you know your body best. So anytime we exercise, we always want to recover with carb and protein. Now, if we're only doing a leisurely walk outside for 30 minutes, we may not need 20 grams of protein. We may need a granola bar with 5 or 10 grams, and that would be sufficient. But that would be someone starting out with exercise, knowing we've got to recover, but we don't want to overdo it either. And a problem I see a lot, and we're going to talk about this, is a lot of my endurance athletes are more hungry, so they eat more, and they wanted to lose weight, but now we're gaining weight because we're doing more activity and we're a lot more hungry. So this is where we've got to fuel after, but we don't need to overdo it. We don't need to overcompensate for the activity we've done. The fuel should be seen as carbohydrate to go in for my muscle store, protein to help build that muscle, and that's really it. We can eat again in 3 to 4 hours if we need to, but this post-workout is really just to get those nutrients in. Okay, but that's an excellent point to bring up. We don't always have to have 20 grams for that. So here's some recovery ideas. You kind of mentioned how do we get enough protein in, what would that look like, and you can see some recovery ideas here. This is a question I get a lot too, so recovery versus a meal. So say I worked out from 5 to 6 p.m., now I'm ready to eat dinner, but I really don't want to eat dinner yet, or that's kind of my dinner time. What should I do? Should I have the recovery drink and then eat a meal later? Should I just have the meal? We could do either way, but a lot of the literature is showing if we can have the recovery really post-workout immediately and then maybe push dinner back a little bit after, it's going to help with that. You can see here why that helps, kind of the 30 minutes after completion of the activity, and we want to make sure we're getting that protein in. If we had a meal, so really this is kind of the 1 to 2 hours post-workout. So this could be something like, say we woke up and we exercised from 5 to 6 a.m. Maybe we just had that simple carbohydrate before. We had a little bit, half of a banana at 4:30. We exercised from 5 to 6 a.m. Then we had the protein shake or maybe a smoothie after exercise while we're getting ready for work. And then maybe we come to work and we have something as breakfast. So it's a little bit later after, and the recovery is really the key time to have the protein carb, but dinner or the meal or the snack may be a little bit later. Does that make sense? Okay. So here are some meal ideas. Really, when we're looking at meal ideas for athletes, it's kind of that basic nutrition here, carb, protein, and healthy fat. We want to make sure that we're getting all 3 of those. And really here, the higher protein levels at meals or continuously throughout the day really has shown a negative impact on liver, a negative impact on our kidneys. So we don't need to overdo it. Our body can only absorb so much at one time. The reason you saw the 20 grams on there too is because most of us can only absorb about 35 grams of protein in one setting. And that's where a lot of research is shown when we can have the 30 grams at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, not just at dinner when we have our chicken or we have our steak. Have it at breakfast, have it at lunch. It helps our body to synthesize that protein a little bit better. So we want it spread out throughout the day, not just right at that post-workout recovery or the exercise meal. Okay, questions on pre, during, post-exercise? Okay, if you think of others too, shout them out. These are great visuals, and you will have these in your slides as well. And I broke this down based on activity level. Because if we did a survey in here, some of you would say, yes, I'm extremely active. I'm doing something 7 days a week. I'm running or doing activity for more than 1 hour. Some of you would say, you know what, I'm kind of doing moderate activity, but what does that mean? What does that look like? And we're going to break each one of these down here. So hopefully you can find a little bit of where you fit. So for those of you who may have an easy training day, or these may just be those of you who this is what you normally do on a regular basis. You like to stay active, but you're not training for anything. That's not your thing, and you're not wanting to do that. These would be more of like an off-season, a rest day, what we would term a lighter workout. This would be more of under 60 minutes as a lower intensity. So what does that mean? Our heart rate is beating, but it's not at a crazy level. We're not out of breath. We're not sweating profusely. We're just doing some moderate activity, and this may be something like a walk, a casual yoga class, Pilates, things like that. When we look at our plate here, we have half fruits and vegetables. We have about a fourth of our grains, but you can see here this little weight management dotted line. When we look at this here, we would try to, if we're trying to lose weight, but exercise moderately, so some light training, we would want to cut our carbs just a little bit. Remember, our carbs are needed for our muscles to move and do endurance activity. So in order to lose a little bit of weight, we still need carbs, but we're just shaving that down a little bit. And then a fourth of our protein is still our lean proteins here. Certainly encouraging our dairy and healthy fats, all very balanced. We're just scaling back a little bit on the carbs due to less than an hour of activity and also more of our less intense training days. A moderate training day, this could be something a little bit more of, if we're trying to gain weight, lose weight, this is really where most of us fit, is this moderate type activity. This would be a little bit more of 45 minutes to an hour of a higher intensity activity. You'll see water aerobics, swimming, hiking. You can see from walking to our heart rate is staying pretty stable to now a little bit higher heart rate and elevated. We're going to see here a little bit more carbohydrates. So that carb shifted a little bit more because we're doing more of our cardio-based activity. If we're sticking to more of our strength training activity and more just weightlifting and doing less cardio, then I would say this could go back up here, and we're going to look at a balanced plate, carb, protein, and fruits and vegetables, but we don't need more carbs on a weightlifting or strength training type day. If we're training hard for a competition day, so you can see what this is going to look like. This is more of our longer endurance type activity. So this is a day with 2 strenuous workouts for competition, back to back. We're looking at marathon, swim meet, endurance cycling. This, I would say, would certainly be over an hour long of activity. And you can see what's changed here is our carbohydrates. So our proteins have stayed about the same. Our carbs are what are changing based on our light day, moderate day, or our hard training day. And the carbs are really what helps with the recovery and also the regeneration of our glycogen, which helps with fatigue, tiredness, and endurance later on from there. Questions on those plates? Yes?
So the fats, I see just 2 tablespoons, and are you including like a fresh avocado in there?
Yeah, so when we look at our fat, fats are something that we want to include for sure. We want our healthy fats. And serving of avocado, and this is a good question because I get this one often with students. If we look at the large Hass avocados, it's a fourth of one of those is a serving. The smaller avocados, it's a half of one of those is a serving. Now this, keep in mind, this is at each plate. So 2 tablespoons isn't for the whole day. This is at each one of our plates that we're having. Yes.
So
yes.
for like a day, you could have like a full avocado.
You could. It just would not be appropriate to have it all at one time. It's kind of like the protein. We need it spaced out throughout the day to help our body absorb different fats or absorb different vitamins. So we want to make sure it's spaced out. Yes.
And do these plates take into account the chocolate milk or what protein shake that you're having right after a workout?
No, this would be
account for reducing your fat in this.
Yes. So the question was, would these plates account for that recovery meal or snack as well? I would say not. This does not count our recovery meal. Remember, that's right after 30 minutes after, so that'd be the protein shake or the recovery snack. And then this would be including in the meal for each one of those. Well, we would balance out about 3 times per day. Okay.
Does the amount of salt changes depending on the training level?
That's an excellent question, and that's not even in here. When she said, does the amount of salt change per intake? This is a very personal preference for most patients. I would say if there's a risk of heart disease or high blood pressure, certainly consult with your physician on what their recommendation would be for amount. If you're a salty sweater, so those who, and we're going to talk about hydration here, but if you notice that when you wipe your sweat, it tastes salty, it feels salty, of the white rings around on your clothing, hats, that type of thing, it means you're just sweating a lot of this sodium and potassium out a little bit. So we want to replenish with that. In fact, a funny story, when I worked with the Texans, one of the guys was just always sweating. And it was a very salty sweater. He had low sodium levels, and we would salt his ham. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's really salty. But he had to get more of that in and more fluids. It helps staying hydrated, but we want to make sure we're getting enough in. So if you are a salty sweater, Do not be afraid to add more salt to your food. Having higher sodium foods in moderation can help with that, but that's an excellent point here. If we're doing more intensive, longer duration outside activity in the heat, we want to make sure we're getting enough of that in. So great point. Okay. All right. So myth versus factor. Eating more protein means building more muscle. What do you think about this?
Myth.
Myth. Why?
Told earlier.
Okay. How many of you feel like you're trying to eat more protein to become stronger, to have leaner muscles? Some. There's a big craze for it. It's ketogenic diet. It's a lot of the fads now, so we see that. But that is a myth. Extra calories or anything in excess is too much. So too much carbs is not good. Too many proteins are not good. Fats, same thing. So excess protein will be stored as the same as excess fat or carbohydrates would be, so we can get too much of that. But this, here again, protein in particular has nitrogen, which is excreted in the kidneys, and it's filtered through the liver. That's where we have a little bit more of this concern with too much protein, especially for our athletes, and can lead to dehydration as well. So if we're not getting enough water in, and if we're not getting enough, or we're getting too much protein, it can cause imbalances in our liver and kidneys. So we want to be careful with that. But that leads a little bit to weight goals. So with athletes too, a lot of times we're doing this just because we're recreational, love to exercise, but some of us are really trying to lose weight, and some of us are really trying to gain weight, but still have that balance. So let's talk a little bit about this. What affects our weight is one, our resting metabolic rate. You may hear this as RMR, basal metabolic rate, BMR. This is really just how many calories do we need per day to maintain basic hormone function, basic metabolic function. You can calculate that many different ways. There's calculators on the internet as well. The equation I like to use is the Harris-Benedict equation. So if you're looking for one in particular, that's a decent one to look at. The thermic effect of food, so this difference by different macronutrient, how much we're expending with our exercise, and then our non-activity. So fidgeting, daily movements, walking, thinking, sitting can affect this. Okay? Our resting metabolic rate, here's this calculation as well. This will be in your slides too. So if you're looking for a sound calculation, this is what I've used. It transfers into kilograms and centimeters, and I can help you out with that if you need that, or we have the wonderful internet. You can type in your weight and it will probably tell you that in kilograms. But this is a great way to calculate your resting metabolic rate. Here again, this just figures out how many calories you're burning at rest, and that's just a baseline. Then we multiply that by different activity factors. So once we have our resting metabolic rate, then we're going to multiply it by activity factors to figure out how many calories we truly need in a daily basis. So sedentary would be little to no exercise. I tell this to students walking around on campus, going to the grocery store, going to the store, walking in and out of work. That would be sedentary. Mild, so we're doing 20 minutes of activity 1 to 3 days a week. This would be going for a walk, maybe doing yoga occasionally. We would multiply our resting metabolic rate by 1.375. Moderately, you can see this here, 30 to 60 minutes a day for 3 to 5 days a week, and then very would be 60 or more, 6 to 7 times a week. This would be something like my triathlete who was training for activity every day, at least an hour, hour and a half. So we're going to multiply that by 1.9. Do the calculation. You'd be surprised for some of you to realize, gosh, I'm really under eating. And I see that in my females a lot. This triathlete I was working with in particular, she wasn't eating she was eating a large amount, but for her compared to other people, I was like, gosh, she's eating so much. But really what she truly needed was way more than that. Some of you too may be overestimating how much you truly need based on your activity level. So it's important to calculate this. As we age, our resting metabolic rate, our RMR, decreases. So we want to keep that into account as well and not just go, well, my resting metabolic rate is 1,200 calories, and then 10 years from now, we're still doing the same thing. Know that it's going to change with our age. So how do we determine our calories? We can see this over and over, and yes, it's calories in, calories out. That's really what we get to at the bottom of this. But if we're not fueling around the exercise, if we're not eating appropriately, we can track our calories all day long. We can eat 1,500 calories of junk every day, and still not have the performance that we want. So we can, check mark we met our calories, but we're not performing the way we want to. So we want to make sure we're getting good quality nutrients in. Weight gain, weight loss, I usually suggest 1 to 2 pounds of weight loss or gain per week. So that's a good steady goal if you're trying to meet certain goals that you have in order to achieve that. For weight gain, I usually say add an extra snack per day, so 200 to 300 calories would be appropriate. So take what you're normally doing and then be consistent with another 200 to 300 calories. For weight loss, that would be shaving off 200 to 300 calories, so finding where that might be most appropriate. Okay? So when we set goals, I always, and this was a patient this morning, she was struggling with, okay, here's where I think I need to be, but I'm not really sure if that's a good weight goal for myself. And I told her, I said, when we step on that scale, it doesn't tell you how much lean mass you have, how much fat mass you have. So don't fixate so much on that number. And we tend to fixate on our weight and how much and what it is. But I really try to emphasize, think about your performance. So if I'm performing better, then maybe I was just under eating to begin with. Maybe I've gained 5 pounds, but was that muscle? Was that fat? Do a body composition assessment. See how much lean mass you have. See how much fat mass you have. And that's really a better indicator to track over time. Certainly setting SMART goals, keeping in mind too, when we set these goals, set something that's realistic and achievable. If you're setting a goal of 3 pounds of weight loss per week and you really only have 10 pounds to lose, it's going to be a lot more challenging to do. If you have 100 pounds to lose, that might be a little bit more realistic, but we've got to make sure we're being realistic with those goals. And here again, when we do body composition, females need at least 15% fat for normal hormone function. Males need at least 5% for just essential body fat. So don't set your goals too unrealistic here. Most females that I see on campus, because we have a bod pod that measures body composition, most females I see are anywhere from 20 to 40%. And that's fairly normal. And most of the population I see is fairly healthy and athletic. So less than 15% would be not a range I would suggest there. Okay, so if you're one of those who are exercising and trying to lose weight and you're not happy with where you are, here's some effective ways to do this. Eating regular meals, but smaller meals throughout the day. A lot of my patients that struggle with weight loss are more my graduate students. They're a little bit older. With age, we just tend to lose our metabolism. So if we can re-stimulate eating more regularly, it helps. And a lot of these patients too are skipping meals. They don't eat all day and then they're eating one meal at dinner time. And that's the worst thing that we could do for ourselves. Here again, not skipping the meals or snacks. Post-exercise, we tend to think too, well, I exercised, I'm not going to eat anything, I did great, I burned some calories. Here again, that's the worst thing we could do too. We want to refuel post-exercise carb and protein. Quality source of lean, protein, fat, carbs at each meal and snack. Drinking enough water, staying hydrated. Sometimes we're just hungry all the time because we're not drinking enough water. And certainly limiting some of our refined carbs, higher fat foods, unhealthy fat foods. One of the challenges too here is to really focus on breakfast. And I can't tell you how many people or students that I work with and adults that I see don't eat breakfast because of time. I'm busy, I'm not hungry. I don't feel well when I do that, but really this is critical regardless of what type of exercise or workout that you're doing. It fuels the entire day, it helps prevent those cravings and overeating later at night, and it really starts our metabolism for the day. But I'll go back to that and say that personally I get up early to work out at 4:30, 5, so I'm not one that was going to eat breakfast before I go work out. So it's important to that refueling to me is more of my kickstart breakfast. But sometimes the night before, for those of you who do work out in the morning, you may need a small snack before you go to bed, and that's okay. You can top off those glycogen stores doing that, especially if you're doing a longer endurance activity more than an hour that next morning. So that's another option for you to make sure we get in some breakfast. Weight loss snacks here, so these are some great options here. Apple sliders instead of using a heavier carbohydrate or refined carbohydrate. Fruit kebabs, veggie chips, we can make those ourselves as well, which help provide a little bit more of those nutrients. So great sources of fiber and some carbohydrates, but will help with that fueling approach as well. All right. So why is skipping meals detrimental? I talked a little bit about this, about metabolism and how that can impact just our overall regulation and how many calories we're burning at rest. But with this too, we can start to break down our own muscles when we don't have enough coming in. And I can't tell you how many males in particular that I see when we do a resting metabolic rate, their needs are 3,000. They're like, oh my gosh, Megan, I'm just not even getting 2,000. So, and I always tell them under eating is just as harmful as overeating. And so when we don't get enough, our body starts pulling from our muscle stores for energy. And so now we've been to the gym and we've been there an hour and we've lifted weights and we're really trying to focus on strength training. But when we don't get enough back in, whether it's from carb, protein, or fat, or calories in general, we're going to pull from its own muscle mass for energy. So that's not an efficient way or use of our time, and making sure we're getting enough can be helpful. So that's why knowing our resting metabolic rate can be helpful here. Instead of changing the quantity of food, think about the quality. And here's where a lot of my patients will say, well, I just can't eat anymore. I feel so full. I'm eating enough during the day. I don't have time. Maybe it's in between work or class or meal times. So think about the quality. Think of higher calorie foods that are nutrient dense. That'd be our nuts, our seeds, our nut butters, our dried fruits. Those are things we can eat a decent amount of, but not have to eat 4 apples to get the same quantity as our 1/4 of a cup of dried fruit. So something to think about here is just the quality of what we're eating. So if we're trying to gain weight, for some patients, this is important for them as well. We want to eat more regularly here. We want to have carbohydrates, lean protein, healthy fat balance again. We're going to add an extra 300 to 500 calories. For some people, that's 200 to 300 if they're just trying to gain a small amount. 300 to 500 if you're trying to gain more. We want to make sure that what we're gaining is muscle mass though. So what I would encourage you to do is to do a or before you start changing anything, do a body composition assessment, and then 3 months later, after you've changed some things, do another one. And we can truly track if my weight has gone up 5 pounds, did I gain lean muscle or did I gain body fat? And if we gain body fat, it's usually because we need to change something in the gym and we need to look at what we're eating here. Extreme protein does not create extreme muscle building, just keeping that in mind. A lot of people will ask me too, well, I have a high body fat, so eating fat, doesn't that mean it translates to body fat? And that's not the case. Just overabundance of calories translates to excess body fat, not necessarily one nutrient or component. Okay? So here are weight gain snacks. So you're going to see a little bit higher calorie here, but still nutrient dense. So we're going to see guacamole, smoothies. I encourage hummus a lot too. Nutrient dense, but we can eat a small amount and still have a high amount of calories here. Flavored milk, nut butters, crackers, granola instead of our cereals. Granola has more calories, and we don't have to eat 3 cups of that to have the same calories here. And you can see all of these here for our weight gain ideas. So we're talking about high quality, nutrient dense. I emphasize this over and over as well. We want to make sure what we're putting in, if we're trying to gain weight, isn't just junk. And we can eat pizza and burgers and junk all day and gain weight, or we can eat some of these higher quality foods. So you can see the comparisons here too, and you'll have these slides of what this looks like, but what we're looking at is healthier options. Same calories when we look at them calorie for calorie, but we're getting a lot more nutrient dense foods here. Okay, let's briefly go through hydration, and then we're going to talk about supplements. So hydration here, 60 to 70% of the body is water. When we sweat, we not only lose the water, but we lose our sodium, potassium, our minerals here, and that's what we've got to replace when we actually exercise. So what we can do is when we weigh, if you're doing a long endurance activity, so when I was living in Houston, I helped with the Houston Marathon, and what we would do, they'd have to do a pre-weight, and then they would come in at the end and do a post-weight. And if any of their weight, and I can't even remember the exact number, but if their weight was a certain amount over, if they had lost a certain amount of pounds during, they had to stay there and we had to rehydrate them and make sure they were stable. So a good way to check that is weigh yourself before activity, weigh yourself after, and you can see that's pretty much your water weight loss. So we've got to replenish that back after we exercise, and you can help track that, especially if you're doing more outside activity where you're sweating a little bit more and in the heat. Hopefully not much longer if it ever cool off. So when we're looking at water versus sports drinks, what I would say is if you're just doing a low intensity exercise, yoga, walking, maybe a 30-minute bike ride, we don't necessarily have to go out and get a big Gatorade and replenish with that. Think of Gatorade as being 60 minutes or longer, or if you're one of those salty sweaters who needs a little bit more of the electrolytes coming in. What we would think about for every hour of heavy exercise, beginning after the second hour, we want the 20 ounces of sports drink to help with rehydration. The sugars in the sports drinks are simple carbohydrates, so remember that's easy to digest. There's no fiber, there's no fat or protein in that, so that's great. But we don't just need this on a daily basis just because we work out. Really try to have it around the exercise or around the activity. In particular, a lot of my core guys that I work with, they'll drink it at lunch or dinner, and they're not even doing any exercise around that. And so I always encourage more around the exercise, and it needs to be longer than an hour if you're going to choose that. Vitamin water too, just be careful of artificial sweeteners. So G2, our vitamin water zero, that's not going to have the carbohydrate or the sugar that we need. It's made with an artificial sweetener, so we're not going to get that replenishment of simple carbohydrate as we would think of in Gatorade. So we want to be careful with that.
Does drinking a sport drink immediately before help?
Yeah, so just drinking a sports drink immediately before, that kind of goes back to that 30 to 60 minute window before exercise. Simple carbohydrate, sports drink is perfect for that, especially for those who are better to tolerate more liquids than food. Just be careful with the volume, because if we have a lot going in and then we're doing more of a higher intensity jogging, biking, swimming type activity, it may feel a little uncomfortable in our stomach. Okay. Energy drinks too, I really discourage against these just because it's more caffeine and sugar. Finding alternative methods like a little bit of soda, a little bit of coffee or tea would be a more appropriate method for our energy beforehand. So what does your workout require? If we think about this, I mentioned if we're just doing light activity, yoga, that would be water. If we're doing a quick, cool jog, that would be water, unless you're a salty sweater or a heavy sweater here. And if we're doing intense lifting, we want protein and carbs as our beverage. When we're doing a long run, here endurance, meaning more than an hour, running, cycling, we're looking at a little bit more of those electrolytes. That would be in our Gatorade, Powerade, things like that. Okay? Foods also help with hydration. And so for those of you who are in that first category of I like to walk, I like to do yoga, moderate activity, but I'm not going out to run for more than an hour or do an intense exercise more than an hour, we still need our electrolytes, but I would always encourage getting those from food first. So you can see many of our fruits, our vegetables, even our coconut water is going to be a great source of those electrolytes. Great ways to get those in without feeling like you have to consume the Gatorade or Powerade type things here. Okay? All right, questions on hydration? All right, with every presentation, I've talked about this a little bit because nutrients are also important. It's easy to focus on calories, carb, protein, fat, how much do we need, but nutrients can also make a big impact on my athletes as well. So iron and calcium being one of those. With our iron, iron is in our red blood cells. It carries oxygen to our body. So if we have low iron levels, guess what? We usually have a little bit trouble breathing. Our muscles don't work as well. And I see that over and over with my athletes who increase their iron intake, and they're doing better with fatigue, tiredness, and even the muscle fatigue in general. So iron is important for that. Calcium is another thing for bone strength. It helps with contraction. Our heart has some of these properties that help with contraction, and calcium being part of that with our nerve signal transmission. So in order to fire those signals to say, run faster, do this, and stimulate that, we need calcium. Magnesium and potassium. Magnesium is another big one that I'm seeing a lot of in students taking supplements of. There's a lot of research going around with this, but in general, magnesium helps open our blood vessels. I kind of mentioned that with that beetroot juice. It opens blood vessels. That means that it goes to our brain, it goes to our muscles, it goes for stimulation. So it really helps with that. It's part of bone mineralization as well, and it helps prevent muscle cramping. For those of you who are cramping and that type of thing, we'll see better benefit with magnesium. And then potassium, our heart is a sodium-potassium pump. Sodium and potassium need to be in balance in our body, so it helps with regulating body water and our muscle contraction as well. Okay? Supplements. Questions before we go into our last section of supplements? All right. So with supplements, what do you think about this? Dietary supplements are regulated, true or false? False. Okay. Does anyone buy any type of supplement that they want to talk about or have questions about? Maybe doctor prescribed, talked about it in a previous class that we did.
Like Move Free for arthritis,
Yeah.
bursitis, that type of stuff.
Yeah, Move Free for bones. Maybe it's like glucosamine chondroitin in there, a little bit helpful with that.
And, yeah.
Yeah, so it helps with bone health. Anything else? Okay. Vitamin D, yes, and we've talked about that a little bit, about how most of us are deficient in that, but it's important to get the test done to figure out if we are before we start doing anything. Same with the arthritis and bone health here. So you're exactly right, the supplements are not regulated. So in comparison to food, food has a food label, it's regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. Our supplements are not. There are different agencies though that do help with regulation, but they're not in a government process here. So you can see the definition of a supplement here. They're regulated by a Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. But you can see this is 1994. Yes, it's been updated, but it's something that's just an act. It's not necessarily a governing board. They're not regulated for safety, purity, or effectiveness by anyone. So just be careful in the supplement section. I always encourage every patient of mine to be aware of what they're choosing, know what you're getting, and know why you're choosing what you're choosing here. I'm going to see if it's, I'm going to talk a little bit about it here. For our athletes like here on campus that do take supplements or do take something, they have to have something on there that says NSF certified. You can buy it in the store, products like this in the store. It's a blue label, or kind of like a royal blue with NSF in white on it. That's a certifying board or agency that does do supplements and regulate them. But here again, it's a third party. Yes, it's something that we take as a credentialed body, but it's not necessarily regulated by our government here. So just be mindful of that if you're taking certain supplements, or you know, a lot of the little shops around town, or if you were doing some sort of training event and your trainer is selling something, just be mindful. It's a money-making business, and you want to be careful what you're putting in. So taking a supplement can't hurt. This is false. We talked a little bit about this. So too much of a good thing can still not be good. So we can still overdo too much here. For example, here we talked a little bit about this before, but fat-soluble vitamins, if we do too much of them, that's vitamin A, D, E, and K. And you'll see vitamin A come up a lot if you just Google vitamin A and toxicity or too high levels. We very rarely recommend a supplement of vitamin A because it can be stored in the body due to being a fat-soluble vitamin, and we can develop the toxicity to that. When we supplement with things that really aren't needed, it can react with different medications. It can react with our body. So taking vitamin D, just because I said some people are deficient, probably wouldn't be a good justification for yourself. Make sure you are truly deficient in it and have a need to do that. Most people are really able to get through all of this with food. If you are concerned about it, just a general multivitamin would be something I recommend often. It's not anything that's going to cause harm, but it's not going to cause you to do better or perform better. It's something that I would say you could do if you feel like you need to do something. Okay? But before supplementing, think about these different foods that are going to impact why you may be supplementing. So inflammation, tart cherry juice, ground ginger, turmeric has really been helpful with inflammation. So incorporating more of these foods in our diet can help. To increase the amount of time and intensity of conditioning, what we would want to look at here is sodium bicarbonate, which is found in baking soda, beta-alanine, meat, fish, poultry. These are great nutrients to be consuming here. And then nitrates found in protein. So that helps with, if we're trying to do more endurance, time, intensity, be faster, do a little bit more intense activity. It has been showing to be effective there. Okay? So if you decide you want to supplement, this is what I would choose. Okay, I'm glad it's in here. I forgot if it was or not, but the NSF is really what we want to look at. You can see that label here. This is really considered the gold standard. This is what our athletes here on campus can choose if they choose to choose that. Like I was even doing some tours with students, and we did a supplement section, Very few of our protein powders will have that at just a traditional H-E-B store. Now, I haven't done extensive going to all these different vitamin shops in town, but there are a few supplements or protein powders I know in particular that will have that on there. Okay? Informed choice is also another one. This is the World Anti-Doping Agency, so it has that check mark on it. It doesn't mean, oh gosh, this is great and safe for me, but it does mean that it's been regulated. It has had another set of eyes on it to see what's truly in it. Okay? Pharmaceutical grade 2, the highest quality of the supplement. Really, this cannot usually be purchased over the counter, so you're going to see that a little bit more in some of our specialty shops. Yes?
You kind of already, I think, answered it, but so protein powders are not like FDA regulated, they count as a supplement?
Right.
Okay.
Yes, protein powders would be counted in our supplement section here as well, not necessarily regulated as a food. Now, like Ensure, Boost, some of those pre-made, already packaged, more of our medical grade products, those are going to be as a food item. It has a nutrition label. It's going to be a little bit more regulated than something like the protein powder that you're mixing with something else. Yes, yes ma'am.
Is the NSF certified products more expensive?
You know, that's a good question. I haven't compared if NSF certified is more expensive than the other. It could very easily be, but here again, in my opinion, if we know what's going in us and it's a little bit more regulated, it's probably worth that to have a little bit more stringent guidelines on it. Yes. Okay, we have about 5 minutes, but go for questions.
So do you recommend using a protein powder?
You know, so for the students, for my patients, I'm always food first. That's just kind of my mentality. But there is a time and place for protein powders. One, it helps with just the recovery if you're not able to get enough in at one time. Two, for those who are trying to get a little bit more calories in but don't have time to cook or prepare things, I think it's great for that. I use it a lot too for some of my patients who don't like to have breakfast, but they'll drink something, so that would be a great recommendation there. If I do recommend a protein powder, there's a few things I look at. One being NSF. Second, a whey protein is going to be absorbed a lot faster, so post-workout we want whey protein. Pre-workout, if you're doing any type of pre-workout drink or supplement, casein protein takes longer to digest. So whey post, casein before. And whey isolate is really what I encourage if you can. It's a little bit more expensive, but isolate means it's been broken down already. So if you remember post-workout, we want something immediate and something that is broken down quickly already for us. So if we don't have to break much of it down ourselves, it's helpful for that. So whey protein isolate is best.
Do you have any experience with vegan proteins?
A lot of my patients use it. I think they're certainly appropriate to use if you want them. Just look at the protein content because sometimes they're a little bit lower than maybe a whey protein might be. But they still can be beneficial. A lot of the pea proteins, like soybean or just chickpea or whatever they're made with, can be a combination, can be just as effective there.
And then is the protein drink good for like the 50 to 30 minute window?
Yeah, post-workout?
Post-workout.
Yes, yes. Protein drink would be very effective for that post-workout. Now, post-workout, I would always mix it with some sort of carbohydrate. I recommend to mix it with a milk source for the carbohydrate or have it with a banana or a piece of fruit because remember, we want both of those. We want carb and protein post, not just protein powder and water. There'd be very little carbohydrate in that. Yes, ma'am.
I keep hearing contradicting information about how much water to drink. And some people say you only drink it when you get thirsty, which if you're in an air-conditioned building, you won't feel thirsty. Mm-hmm. Is there an amount which is considered too much water?
Yes, so how much water should we drink a day? The recommendation usually is about 64 ounces, 8 cups per day. If you're a bigger person or a smaller person, I would say even half of our body weight in ounces is a great recommendation as well. Now, we can drink too much, so remember that our sodium and potassium, our electrolytes, depend on our water content. So if we don't have a lot of water in, we can become dehydrated, which can impact our sodium and potassium levels. Same as having too much water coming in. Now our sodium and potassium levels are diluted a whole lot by our water intake, so we can it can be just as harmful to overdo water as it is to underdo water. So sticking to around half the body weight would be a good goal or recommendation. 64 ounces per day is a good recommendation too. And trying to have it throughout the day, not just at one time of day.
So I've heard stories, I think one time they had in the news that a bunch of, I guess, young kids, they had challenged each other to drink, they were drinking how much water, and some of them had to be taken to the hospital, and like they were drinking more than a gallon of water
Right.
in a very short time.
And you wouldn't want to do that because it can dilute, I say dilutes our nutrients. I mean, it's much more scientific than that. But if you think about, if you have sodium and potassium or salt sitting in a jar and you poured water in it and poured more water and more, you don't have as much to go around. Same as if you took the water out, it's sitting there and now we're more dehydrated, and that can be not good either to have too much salt in our body. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, do you have any foods that you like to recommend as far as getting enough potassium?
Really, any of our fruits and vegetables are great. Our bananas, yes, we hear that a lot. Our white potatoes have more potassium than even a banana, so those are great to include. Any of those would be certainly appropriate. Fruits and vegetables, wide variety, they're all going to have it in there. But I can even give you my card too. I have a whole list of potassium-rich foods if you need more of that. The reason we're just a little bit more careful with it is because we can overdo potassium too, and our heart is a sodium-potassium pump, and we don't want to go too crazy with that. But I'll give you my card. I'm happy for you to email me that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you have an event coming up, and you've heard about carbo loading a day or two or 2 days before. What's the recommendation?
Yes, so we have an event coming up, carbo loading, how much, and that type of thing. You know, we used to talk about it a lot, and carb loading and eating pasta before a race the next day. Really, my recommendation is have a balanced diet the days leading up, but if you're exercising, so most of our endurance activities are more first thing in the morning, so having more carbohydrates on the day before would be appropriate, but we still need protein, we still need the fats as well. It kind of goes back to that plate where the carbs were a little bit of half the plate, not a fourth of the plate. That's what I would focus on especially the day before. You could do it 2 days before if you wanted. It just helps to top off those glycogen stores to help with more endurance activity. Now, if you're not doing a lot of endurance activity, so not more than an hour, just kind of leisurely running or activity, I wouldn't suggest that we necessarily need to do that just because we're going to do some jog for 30 minutes in the morning. It's not so necessary. That answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm thinking more of like a race day, like if you're doing the 5K,
Yes.
if you're doing the triathlon. Or
Yeah, certainly. Then I would say a day or two before, have half of our plate carbohydrates, a fourth protein, a fourth being fruits and vegetables, leading up into the event to help with topping off those stores. But any more than that would not be necessary. Okay. I'm happy to stay after too. Do you have another question?
Oh, well, I came in late, so I wanted to hear about the pre-workout energy bars and that kind of stuff.
Yes. So pre-workout, 30 to 60 minutes before, we want simple carbohydrates. So that'd be like the Gatorade. That would be something like half of a banana, very low fiber, low fat, and low protein foods. 3 to 4 hours before a workout, we would want a balance of carbs and protein together. So that may be like yogurt with granola, so we're having carb and protein before, but that's 3 to 4 hours before, not right before the activity.
Okay, so
Right.
you're saying not those big the protein bars with 12 grams.
If you did that, I would say half of that or a fourth of that immediately before. If you did that 3 to 4 hours before your activity, completely fine. If it's right before, though, it just sits in our stomach, and then that causes a little bit of gastrointestinal issues during the run or during the activity.
And it doesn't help with endurance.
No, not immediately before. Immediately before, we want the simple carbohydrate.
They talk about eating more nuts, but comparing raw nuts versus roasted nuts, is there a difference?
You know, raw versus roasted nuts, I would say nutritionally they're about the same. It depends on, they may be adding things to the roasted nuts, if they're adding sugar to it or adding oil to it or adding salt to it. But for those of you who need more salt, the roasted with salted is a much better option than just the plain roasted or just raw nuts. So it depends on the patient, but nuts are a great source of protein and healthy fat. We just want to make sure if we're having it right before the activity, it's pushed about 3 hours or so before, not right immediately before, because it has the protein and fat in it.
Because I was under the impression that somehow heat destroys the good
No,
feature of it.
no, not necessarily, not with our nuts, not the roasting process. So you're good there, whichever one you like. Yes.
So say you want to increase your lean muscle mass, do you think it's possible to do that while like recomping, or do you think you need to eat more to do so? Like, do you think, are you of the opinion that you need to cut or bulk, or do you think it's possible to recomp?
Yes, so you're wanting to increase lean muscle mass. One, I always look at what type of activity are we doing. So if we're just doing more of our cardio-based activity, we're probably never going to increase the lean muscle. So we've got to do some strength training in there. And trying to do more than just the toning of strength training, so 5-pound weights at 20 reps would not cut it there. We're going to look at 20-pound weights at 5 reps, so heavier weight, smaller rep to build muscle.
So say you are doing like heavy
Yes.
strength training, like or lifting just in general, if you were eating at the same amount of calories and your nutrition was the same as when you weren't doing that, is it possible to recomp that way, or do you think nutritionally you need to adjust things?
Yeah, when you say recomp, tell me what you're meaning.
Basically just adjust the composition of your body. So
Okay. Yes, so one, I would test the body fat to see first where we are. Secondly, yes, we can, but we got to make sure we're not under fueling. So if a patient comes in and they're doing a lot of strength training, they're eating about the same as they were before, what I look at then too is, okay, are we eating enough? So sometimes under eating can cause us to pull from that muscle, remember, for energy, and we're never going to build the muscle there. So if someone's trying to lose weight and build muscle at the same time, we can do that. We've got to add a little bit of cardio to lose the weight, keep the strength training high, but get enough calories coming in as well. So calculate your resting metabolic rate, see where you are on that to make sure we're getting enough for one. We can add a little bit more calories with more of our activity level, which would be appropriate. And what I would suggest if you're trying to build more lean muscle mass, remember kind of what we looked at here, those carbohydrates were more for endurance athletes. We want a little bit more protein to carbohydrate ratio when we're trying to build the muscle. So if your calories are on target, you're not under, you're still lifting weights, maybe you're doing 1 or 2 days of cardio per week to help with toning, then I would look at maybe adding a little bit more protein, cutting back on some of the carbs, especially if we're doing more strength training to cardio activity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Try to mimic the carbs with cardio and the protein with strength, still within moderation, but it shifts just a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, this may be a dumb question. What exactly are the lean muscles?
Lean muscles. Yes, so lean muscles, so it's kind of like when we have our body is comprised of body fat or muscle mass. And so we have either of those, and our muscles would be our arms, legs, stomach, all of that. And what we want to do is try to build it. But muscle in general on our body is lean, but it's always surrounded by some fat, and we can feel that. And that's what we want to try to minimize if we're trying to increase our lean muscle mass. So I say lean muscle mass, it's all pretty lean in general, but we want to enhance that and make more muscle instead of more fat.
I thought there were lean muscles and...
No, not necessarily. We all have muscle, but some of us may be more toned and a little bit stronger muscle than others. But we all have the muscles under there, we just don't always see it.
Right.
Okay. All right, I'm happy to stay afterwards too if you have questions. And then next week will be mindful eating.
Yes, and it's our last series,
Yeah,
our last
really fun.
session of the series. So really, I hope you guys will enjoy it. But like you
Will
said,
you
if
be
you have any
offering
questions.
those series again, like next year?
To be determined. Yes, we would love to have Megan back, but we'll have to look at programming for the future.
Right, I missed portion 4. I saw this and next week's.
Yeah, they are on our website. So if you're interested in going back to look at what we've presented in the past, check out the Wellness Works website. They're all listed.
Well, listen, I'm ready.
Yes, that's it. Perfect. Well, thank you all for being here. We appreciate it.